Welcome back to the Board Game Closet second studio. My name's Bradley. So Barenpark and Patchwork both have history with the Board Game Closet. Jimmy reviewed both of these years ago. They're great, maybe even retro by the style that we do things now. So if you haven't seen those, go check them out. Because today, I'm not giving you a review. Today, I'm going to tell you which one of these games I like better and why. Let's just give a little bit of detail overhead though, so that you kind of know what I'm talking about. So in Barenpark, this is a game for 2 to 4 players and plays in about 30 to 45 minutes. In my experience, it always goes longer than that. Maybe not more than an hour, but it always takes everyone a few extra minutes to decide what tiles they pick before we move on to the next person's turn, which is typical in most games, I'm sure. So when you start Barenpark, you start with a tile with the name of your Bärenpark on it. And there's a bunch of different construction worker type symbols out there on your player board. Depending on where you lay your tile and what symbol you cover up will tell you what tile you can get, or if you get another player board. You'll work your way up to 4. And at the end of the game, the points that are on each tile, you'll tally up, and whoever has the most wins. Then on each player board, when you fill them up, you get awarded a bear statue, right? The bear statues are worth more points than the tiles, but also there's only so many and they have descending values on them. So whoever gets the first one has the most points, and then the next is not so much, so on and so forth. And there are several tiles that you can choose from that have the same kind of mechanism. Whoever grabs the top one has the most points, and then you go down and there's not so much. Then as you get to the most point value tiles, there's only one per tile, but then there's only like 3 or 4 that you're able to get. For example, the most points you can get would be the orange excavator tiles, and there's only a few of those. And then you work your way down to the white cement truck, and then the green wheelbarrow, that would be your food trucks and your bathrooms, so on and so forth. My family loves this game. We always take it with us on holidays because there's a good chance they're going to want to play it. It just feels good to lay the piece down exactly where you want it, to pick the piece off of the board that everybody wants, and then at the end of the game, if you've done well, you've got an entirely filled up player board, and you got to pick not just the first box, but where the other boxes would go. Maybe you've got an L shape, maybe you've just got a square shape, and so it's more customizable on how your Bärenpark will turn out, and how you get the points there, how quickly you can gather the points. Maybe you've decided that the bear statues are the way to go, or maybe it's I need to get the highest point value tiles before anyone else does. Both strategies have worked for me in the past, which I hardly ever win, so maybe don't listen to me on that. But it's a great time. So one thing that makes Barenpark special is it comes with these different achievements. Maybe one achievement is you need 3 different tiles with polar bears on them, or the goby bears, pandas, 3 different pandas, and you get extra points based on that. Everyone is able to get to those, but whoever gets to them first is the one that claims the points, right? So Barenpark is really a rush to whoever can get the one thing that everyone has access to, right? Because the first person that gets it always ends up on top, which is interesting. It makes the tension in the game really high. Patchwork is only for 2 players, so that is the biggest difference between these two. If you have any more than 2 players, Patchwork is out automatically. But I want to move past that, because to me, 2 players is more often than not, maybe I should even say half the time, is all that I play with, is my wife and I, or me and a friend. So 2-player games really are a versatile tool on my shelf, right? So I wanted to be sure to talk about this. Each of the players that are playing have 1 tile board, and you don't get any more than that, or a player board, you might even say. And instead of filling up the whole thing, you get rewarded in Patchwork for making a 7x7 square. or entirely filled grid. Now that is so much more freeing than Barenpark, but is also so much more constricting too, because you never know what piece you're actually going to get to. Which brings me to my next point. In the center of the table that you're playing on, you'll put out the time tracker for how many turns are left in the game. There's only so many, and you can visibly count them down. For one, every tile that you buy could potentially have a number of time blocks or turns that you have to give in order to take that tile. And then when it comes to the next person's turn, whoever is last place on the board gets to go first. So you could get to go 2 turns in a row. Now, what determines what tile I can get? Well, around the turn board, the turn tracker board, is encircling it is all the tiles that you can potentially buy. And then you also get this little pawn looking piece that once you place it down, you can only choose from the next 3 tiles going clockwise fashion in front of that. So as soon as I take the third one away, well, that is a completely different set of tiles that the next person can buy from. So it's not just who gets there first. It's actually kind of a strategic way of thinking, okay, if I go for this one, this will mess the other person up. Or if they buy this tile, then I know which tile that I can plan for next. And so there's a lot more strategy in Patchwork. How do you win? Whoever ends up with the most victory points at the end of the game wins. But in this case, victory points are buttons. And buttons is actually also the currency. You actually will buy most of the tiles with buttons, as well as the turns taken away from you. Now that creates a whole nother layer of strategy. If I buy this piece that's worth, I don't know, for example, 5 buttons, that's 5 less that I'll have at the end of the game to count. However, on the turn board, there are buttons there that indicate when you pass them, that's when you collect how many buttons are on your player board. And so it's not only tile placing, but it's engine building as well, for points, a victory point engine that you've built. Both of these games, the artwork is not incredible. There's literally no people, no bears, nothing to look at in Patchwork. And then in Barenpark, that's all you have, is the couple of folks that's on your player board, or maybe the front of your Bärenpark. The enclosures have a few bears, but honestly it's copy and paste on most of the designs. So the artwork is not just overwhelmingly good in either one of these games. But I will say that the strategy that Patchwork brings in just completely wins out for me Barenpark every time. Now again, I shouldn't have to say this again, but I will. Once you reach the 3rd player count, Patchwork is out anyway. I'm talking about if you have 2 people and you can't decide what to play. If you haven't checked out Patchwork, you need to go check it out. This is a great little game that, even though all you're doing is just making a quilt, filling out that 7x7 grid seems so crucial. But if you let that distract you from strategically placing buttons or tiles in other ways, that can mess you up in the end. And then at the same time, if you're not focused enough on it and not watching what the other person is thinking about at the same time, you might lose out on extra points that you could have easily had. So where Barenpark is literally place, pick up, place, pick up, place, pick up, Patchwork, you can place, but it still is not necessarily pick up whatever I want, because there's the buttons I have to keep in mind, there's how many turns that's going to take away from me when I buy it, and those steps, those few extra levels of complication in Patchwork make it just levels ahead, for me at least, levels ahead above Barenpark. Now Barenpark is on my shelf, it'll stay on my shelf because it holds that special place, but Patchwork will always come out ahead if I've only got 2 people playing. And for me, like I said, that happens more often than not. And there's also something about, so Barenpark has a whole mat, whole board dedicated to all the tiles being laid out. Patchwork has this messiness to it that when you lay out the turn tracker and then have to circle all the tiles around, and when we play, we usually have to start putting the tiles out and then realize, oh heck, we need more room. So we back all the tiles up and we fill in little spaces, and that messiness really pulls out the theme for me. There's just something about my grandma, or I knew this old man. We had a neighbor, this old man that used to quilt as well, and they would just always be working on these different patches. And maybe they weren't a mess, but they were always laying around everywhere, right? So that when they needed them, they could go get to them, or they could be working on them when they had time. And there's just something about that. The circle of tiles laid around that really brings out the theme. So I'll say it again, Patchwork is hands down for me so much better than Barenpark. If you haven't got it, if you haven't looked into it, you really should, especially if you don't have a lot of two-player games. This has become one of my favorite two-player games easily. So thanks for sticking around. Thanks for listening to what I have to say. If you haven't watched those other reviews, please go back and do that. They're great. They're great. Jimmy did a great job with them. You can find us on Facebook, of course, YouTube, like and subscribe, all that good business. And then if you really like what we do, go find us on Patreon. Maybe throw us $1 or $2. So anyway, we appreciate it, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.